Hi, I'm Miles, and this is Auto-Minded. And these are a few questions that were asked by some ad wizards about 50 years ago. Is it a plane? Is it a car? No, it's the Unisport. And if the title in this video feels a bit dramatic, I kind of get that because, well, at the very least, this is public knowledge because I have the brochure for it right here. Maybe what I really should have just said is, if you know about the Unisport, I want to be your friend because, well, this vehicle is very obscure, and as you're about to find out, it's also very, very cool. The Unisport was from the mid-70s and was a product of the Unicar Corporation out of California. Their design was both thoughtful and practical, where they sold you the front half of the chassis, and then you could put whatever motorcycle you wanted in the back. They claimed it only took a few hours to mate the two together, but they also had dealers who would do a professional installation. What really made it nice is they left so much of the motorcycle intact that they suggested that you could actually turn it back into a two-wheeler anytime you wanted. And this picture certainly shows you that there is plenty of motorcycle left. In fact, you can still see those seats back there. Now, Unisport suggested that that made for a good luggage rack, but since the handlebars are still there, you could probably add two of your more adventurous friends. And so you had the potential to have a rare four-seat cycle car. And that's exactly what this was, a cycle car. And if you don't already know what that is, well, it's easiest just to lump these in with microcars because the whole heart of the appeal is having a vehicle that's both efficient and affordable. So they were very popular in post-World War II Europe because all their motoring resources were scarce at the time. And the topic became relevant again in the 1970s in the USA because we were worried about both big inflation and fuel. And that kind of feels like a topic that's still relevant today, right? But what makes Unicar's Unisport really cool is that they added some intrigue in with their economy. And that's because that front axle, it had an electronic actuator on it that helped you lean into the turns. And you got to do that on demand because it was all engaged by a few buttons on the driver's steering wheel. And I could give you some graphics to really help explain it, but as it turns out, Unicar put it right on their logo. And so, more than just basic transportation, you could see that they're there for true driver fun, and we always want to get behind such an enthusiast-driven machine. That's why when you look at the first brochure right here and you really think of the time, it starts to fill me with a little sense of dread because this is 1970s California and there's plenty out there that had a ton of ambition but never got past the prototype stage. I'm talking about things like the ultra-efficient Dale and the high-flying Mizar. And so the Unisport kind of put the best of those two together because they claimed you could get up to 70 miles per gallon and their slogan was all about being a low-flying machine. But when you actually look into this brochure, you only see one static image. The rest of it is just illustrations. So it's a very professional product, but it really doesn't prove anything other than you had one little model that you may have made in your garage and the whole company may have never left suburbia. So is that the whole story of the Unisport? Thankfully not, because I've got this picture from Paul Bilton-Smith and it tells us a heck of a lot more. You see, this isn't a catalog shot. It's a photo of Paul's dad, Ed, and Paul's brother, Andy. This is in the 1970s, and Ed and his partner were distributors for Unicar in the Pacific Northwest. And not only is Ed driving a real production Unisport, but it also shows some interesting features. For starters, the catalog first showed us that it was on cycle wheels, but this one has evolved to car wheels and tires for better handling. And Paul notes that if you didn't get the optional windshield, you really needed a large father in front of you to block all that wind. And we see that kind of thing, you also understand that Unicar was consistently trying to evolve to get closer to customer tastes because, well, I've got an updated flyer here and at least they're showing a lot more real cars here. And they've also got some cool things like now they're offering wheel and tire packages including slotted mag wheels because, well, that's just a 1970s favorite. And what's even more telltale about the 1970s is this is an era when vehicles had names like Challenger, Cougar, Firebird, real big things for real cars, and so to keep up with that, it was no longer the Unisport, it was now the Streaker. Did your mind just cue the Ray Stevens music too? The song was out at the same time this car was there, and well, it was pretty popular in the mid-1970s to strip down naked and go streaking. But if there's any irony in this, it's especially because for Unicar, getting to the Streaker really all meant about covering up more. It's because both the Streaker and the Streaker XE now came standard with windshields. And there was an optional Super Sport package that hid the motorcycle behind fiberglass sides and a soft tonneau over the seats. But if you really want to understand the evolution of Unicar Corp's products, or just Unicar Corp in general, you really can tell when you look at the price list, because I've got one from the early brochure and I've got one from the later brochure. When you look at the early one, it costs about $1,700, and that buys you the chassis that then you have to plug in the motorcycle to. And they list some options like a heater, radio, or what was an essential windshield at the time. And then you look at this later price list for the Streaker XE, and the base price looks about the same. But something here has changed. It may be cost of production, or it may just be 1970s inflation, but that hallmark banking suspension is no longer standard. It's a $430 option that they now call the Unisport package. So if you really start looking at this, you can start to see the cracks in Unicar's business, because those Streaker XE did come with a better windshield and it was only $1,689. The problem was that you really wanted to add some options to there if you were going to have it for your own. First one of those was, of course, that Unisport chassis, but you probably also want to get the hardtop, maybe the doors, maybe the reverse gear. Those kind of things, it really make it more like a $2,400 vehicle, and that's before you even add in the donor motorcycle. So if this is 1976, your cost is probably going to be about the same as a base Pinto or even a Volkswagen Rabbit. And that's where the real problem is, because of course, Unisport was never thinking that they're going to go toe-to-toe with Volkswagen and steal customers out of their showroom. But this is a cycle car, and it's supposed to be more economical. It's supposed to be cheaper. And so if they can't win on that price advantage, it's always going to be at a disadvantage. And, well, quite frankly, it just looks like Unicar never really had their business booming at all. So if we wind back the clock to when Unicar was just calling the car the Unisport, they talked to Popular Mechanics in 1974, and they claimed they were producing around 50 vehicles a month. That just seems way too ambitious. It sounds more like their dream capacity as opposed to what they're actually making. Because if you talk to our friend Paul, he says that his dad only had 3 Unisports before he gave up the distributorship. It just wasn't that popular, and so you can understand why they faded away. But as much as they had difficulties, it's extremely important to understand what they achieved, because that really cool banking suspension that they did in the 1970s, that was something the big guys were trying to do for decades to come. There were concept cars like the General Motors Lean Machine and the Mercedes LifeJet. A company called Vanderbrink would even have a small production in the 2000s of a car called the Carver. So as it turns out, Unicar got there first, and they did it simpler. So it really feels like we can end the story on a high note. Only problem is that the story just feels incomplete. There's all sorts of other things I want to investigate. For example, it's been said that Bruce Myers of Manx fame is the one who designed the top. And I really want to know what it feels like to drive a Unisport, because, well, that really cool tilting chassis, remember, that was done manually on the steering wheel. So did it happen that it was also like power steering, was always just trying to find center when you let go? Or were you actually just trying to have to do that manually and just really hoping your head was on straight? Plus, our friend Paul just recently reacquired one of his dad's Unisports, and he'll be restoring that in the future. So that's absolutely worth following up. And follow-up's really a central theme here, because if you currently look at those websites that even deal with Unicar or Unisport, there's not that many of them, and most of them really haven't been updated in years. Almost feels like the world has forgotten about this story. But some of you out there, some of you that are watching, you have that missing puzzle piece. You haven't forgotten about the Unisport. You can tell me more about this, and so please, put that in the comments, because I've got a story this cool on my desk, and I'm not just going to let it go till we tell it fully. So let's get together, let's do a follow-up, and let's do some real justice for Unicar. Thank you for watching.